The Trumpet Daily from Jerusalem.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Trumpet Daily. The Middle East today is not what it was in early 2009, the last time Israel went on the offensive to reduce the missile fire coming from Gaza. With rockets landing on the outskirts of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, the forces of radical Islam are pushing their way to this very city. Jerusalem is the goal. Now, last Friday evening, as many residents here in Jerusalem were about to light their Sabbath candles, people in this city were shaken by the sound of blaring air raid sirens, followed by two distinct booms in the distance. The missiles were launched from Gaza, and they traveled 45 miles before landing just a few miles south of Jerusalem. This was the first time rocket warnings have gone off in Jerusalem. It marked the first time the City of Peace has ever been targeted by Hamas rockets. And it was the first time, period, in 42 years that a rocket had been launched at Jerusalem. Now, some people might brush aside last week's attack and say, well, what's the big deal? It was a few miles from Jerusalem. Both rockets landed in an open field. But of course, the reason this is such a big deal is because 3 years ago, Hamas couldn't get anywhere near Jerusalem with their rockets. So we had better start looking at the trend here and wake up to where this is headed. Hamas released a statement after the attack last week saying, "We are sending a short and simple message. There is no security for any Zionist on any single inch of Palestine, and we plan more surprises." So, I guess the question is, what happens during the next phase of this conflict when Hamas is even better prepared, when Hamas has even more powerful weapons, missiles that can go even farther? Let me just read to you what the New York Times wrote on November the 16th about the current phase of the Israel-Hamas conflict. The article compares Operation Pillar of Defense with the last Israeli offensive back in 2009. It says the combination of longer range and far deadlier rockets in the hands of more radicalized Palestinians, the arrival in Gaza and Sinai from North Africa of other militants pressuring Hamas to fight more, and the growing tide of anti-Israel fury in a region where authoritarian rulers have been replaced by Islamists means that Israel is engaging in this conflict with a different set of challenges. In other words, it's so much worse this time around than it was just 3 years ago. The terrorists have deadlier weapons. The dictators who kept the Islamists in check in other nations are gone. Terrorist reinforcements are streaming into Gaza from North Africa. And now, of all places, Jerusalem is a target. This isn't a quote coming to you from a Trumpet magazine a few months back. This is what the New York Times is telling us. Now, we were here in Jerusalem in our apartment when those sirens went off last week, and I'll tell you, as sobering as that warning was, the most disturbing part about the whole evening is the wild celebration that erupted here in East Jerusalem, which is just behind me. The celebration that erupted once they knew, the residents on the eastern half of this city, once they knew that Hamas was targeting Jerusalem. It reminded me in so many ways of the way it was several years ago, back in 2001, the jubilant atmosphere in East Jerusalem, if you remember, on the day that America was attacked, 9/11. Let's just take a look at this one clip.
The V sign for victory being displayed in East Jerusalem today among jubilant Palestinians that the United States had been subject to this attack. What are we to make of that, Jennifer? Yasser Arafat may issue this condemnation. Look at this. We're seeing people applauding, clapping, smiling, happy to know that thousands of Americans have died in this sneak attack. And there you see a V for victory sign held up to the camera. What are we to make of that, and what are we to make of what about what Yasser Arafat said today?
The United States blamed by some Palestinians for its ongoing support, as it is seen, of Israel in this conflict, in this Middle Eastern conflict. However, while some Palestinians were taking to the streets in apparent celebration, one youth was quoted as saying, as he received a sweets handed around in celebration, "This is a sweet from Osama bin Laden," he said.
Now, about the only positive thing that happened for America on 9/11 is that for a brief moment in time, the news media was uncharacteristically objective. They just simply reported what was happening on that very sad and tragic day, and many people were stunned to see those images of Palestinians cheering for Osama bin Laden and welcoming the deaths of thousands of civilians. Now, when those sirens went off last week, and many Palestinians celebrated those explosions, happening right here in their own city of all things, I think it revealed a lot about just how deep and how bitter the division is here in this city. And really, it's a chilling preview of what's coming. And yet, when you look at it, at least with the coverage here, it was hardly reported on, which to me was somewhat stunning. There were several tweets from Jerusalemites that mentioned the sounds of the cheering and the fireworks and even gunfire. There were reports of gunfire, but it was a pretty long and loud celebration. The Times of Israel reported on its blog just shortly after the sirens went off that you could hear the sound of gunshots and police sirens right after those air raid sirens went off. But outside of that little blog report and a few tweets, as I said, hardly anybody reported on it. And there really wasn't much coverage of the protests that happened in Jerusalem earlier in the day as well. Just a few hours before those sirens went off, they had a protest just outside the old city walls. I'll just show you one more clip from that demonstration. This is from Friday, again, Friday, November 16th in the afternoon here in Jerusalem, and the footage was taken just outside the old city walls at the Damascus Gate. Take a look. Now, judging by these images and the sounds as well that we heard coming from East Jerusalem that night of the sirens, it surely won't be much longer before this city explodes in violence, just as God prophesied. It's in Zechariah 14. You can read it for yourself, starting in verse 1. It says, "Behold, the day of the Lord comes, and your spoil shall be divided in the midst of you, for I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. And the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, the women ravished, and half of the city," it says, "shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city." So here Zechariah gives us the big overview of prophesied events right at the end of this age, and he starts with the day of the Lord and then works his way backwards. First, God says, "I'll gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle." This refers to when Jesus Christ will gather the armies of this world just before he sets foot on the Mount of Olives, which is just back here to my left. But before that happens, it says Jerusalem shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished. Now this refers to the European king of the north conquering Jerusalem after it smashes the Islamic king of the south. But before that, before all of that, God says half of Jerusalem will go into captivity. Now this refers to the Islamic conquest of East Jerusalem. That's what's prophesied to happen next here in this city. And last Friday night, I think, we were given just the smallest of previews of what's coming. You can feel the prophesied division of this city. It's building. It's building right before our eyes. Jerusalem is where it all begins. Bible prophecy shows that violence in this city, violence in Jerusalem, will trigger a much larger conflict that will spread over all the earth. Now, you can read more about this in our article, Watch Jerusalem. We also produced a Trumpet Daily on this very subject just a few weeks ago, and I'm sure of it, we'll be producing more along these lines in the weeks and the months ahead. Thank you for joining us today. This is Stephen Flurry reporting from Jerusalem.